The Rat by Ghostwriter 13. The chamber had been empty for some time, though he had no idea how long exactly. Their walls were worn and coated in such a thick layer of dust one wouldn't know what their original color had been. Though that didn't matter, as it was too dark to see anyways. They were empty, only the husks of spiders in their web and the bones of scampering mice. Tunnels and their chambers were completely empty and deserted, for all but the rat. It was not really a rat, of course, but that was what it had been called, and it was all that he remembered of the long ago times when the halls of the grand mansion bustled with life. There was only the rat now, at least in the chambers. There may have been others in the main rooms, servants maybe, or perhaps even its father, but it would not have known to look for them, nor remembered who they were, if they even existed at all, and they likely did not. Not any more. They would have been like it, husks of life, now lost. The thing that undid them was change, but nothing changed in chambers. Nothing but the new dust, and you couldn't really tell it was there. It was too dark for that. Had it been brighter, it wouldn't have mattered, for everything was gray, dry and lifeless. One lonely stone wall could not have been told from another. Not by anyone but the rat, of course. It loved the chambers, it loved them, since it was a he and not an it, since it had been a living boy. He used to creep in through little hidden doors throughout the grand home. His favorite had been in the wine cellar, where nobody but the spiders could see his comings and goings. He'd creep and he'd crawl throughout the halls, secret chambers they'd been, meant to help get from one place to the next. They'd been his grand halls, his mighty forest, his cozy cottage. He would toil away exploring one after the next. That was why he'd been called the Rat, for he was always lurking where he shouldn't be. He'd been in there nearly every chance he got, and one day when a wall came crashing down, he didn't leave, he became an it, and it didn't remember who he was. It only knew the tunnels, its private catacombs, and it stayed there longer than all the others, for the tunnels never changed. It never lost its way, and wandered on relentlessly and confused to the place where all husks of life must fade to eventually. It stayed and it crept and it crawled, and it crawled and it crept, on, forever, and another forever, forever and ever again. Until it didn't, because the wood around the mansion had been sold. They would be preserved, and the old buildings would be knocked down. When the big yellow bulls came, the rat had heard it. If it had remembered fear, it would have shivered and sickened, curling up in the most familiar and unchanging of the chambers, eerie, tingling, crushing sensations racing through every inch of it, dreading what it cannot explain and wishing for it all to go away. But it did not remember fear, and instead was just confused, for the chambers were dark and silent, and while they stood hung, shrouded in shadowy gloom, the silence had been broken by the muffled cries of the strange things it could not see. Gray walls soon came crashing down, toppled by the bulls. The rusted and dusted silverware now turned gray by grime, clushed the gray stone floor, coated in a moth-eaten old carpet, faded to gray, toppled by the bulls. The old gray ceiling, filled with stained glass skylights that were now so dirty they looked gray, caved in just as the largest chamber once had, toppled by the bulls. The rat raced about the tunnels, desperate to find the lowest floor where surely the bulls and their toppling could not reach. There, too, its attempts to remain unchanged were thwarted, for roofs of the tunnels had collapsed, with walls, and light came pouring in. If the rat could feel it, it would have burned with it, shivered and withered in agony as it was strangled by the first light it had touched in centuries. But it could not feel pain, so instead it was just confused, for the tunnels were supposed to be suffocating in darkness, too dark to see the dust that had settled on the cold grey walls. The bulls toppled it, and rolled happily in the dust that turned them grey. The rat could see the strange bulls strolling about what was once its home, now toppled the bulls, and it saw something new, a long-necked yellow creature lifting the earth in its maw and stretching it into cellars, filling the mass of rooms and the tunnels between them. If the rat could have breathed, the earth would fill its lungs. It would choke and retch like the creatures, clawing for air, worming to the new earth like a mole blindly trying to escape a flooded burrow. But it could not breathe, so instead it just drifted, lazily and confused, to the surface. It was slow, and by the time it reached the air, the bulls were gone, withered and rusted for many years. The rat stood on the long grass, gazing out the forest that had once been beautiful, flowering garden surrounded by a hedge labyrinth that had been near impossible to solve, though of course it didn't remember that. All it knew was that things were changing, and there was no point in remaining. So it wandered away, and he finally joined the others.